I was in the middle of beginning to talk about Erikson's next to last stage, the one he has labeled as generativity versus stagnation. And I didn't check everything I said about before my lecture today, everything I said about last week, but I seem to remember I said the stage is usually ushered in sometime in midlife when the experiencer now has to confront the fact that death is a certainty and death is going to happen and life is going to end. And that stirs a kind of primordial death fear in all of us. Earlier in life, we've been able to push those thoughts away. We know that we're going to die starting at about age 5. We understand that there is such a thing as death and it's permanent, but we can do thought stopping by comforting ourselves and reassuring ourselves that that doesn't concern us at all. It's far off in the future, and we can just about forget about it and go about our business for as long as we'd like. We're unable to do that after the moment I'm talking about now that happens to us somewhere in midlife, and death comes to be our constant companion and a frequent thing that preoccupies us. One of the ways that we can comfort ourselves as we work our way through the terror is to search for and to put into place some kind of immortality projects for ourselves. And these vary in scope and size. If you're very wealthy, you endow a medical building and put your name on it forever. Or you try and write the great symphony or get a poem published or get a book published for the first time. It often happens in simple ways. We mentor younger people. We try and tell thoughts about our earlier life to our grandchildren, hoping they'll remember who we were, and implanting parts of our consciousness into the consciousness of other people. And all of that takes on great meaning for us. Uh, Let me, just for a second, I'll bring the graphic back up for a moment. There it is, generativity versus stagnation. And it sits on top of industry versus inferiority. So people who have trouble getting through this stage and start falling off on the side of stagnation, for those of us who work with clients, we should suspect and open up the possibility that something happened wrong at this stage, industry versus inferiority, the one that unfolds usually during the elementary school years, where the child is learning how to expand, how to take control of things, how to use his or her talents, and has not been blocked by shaming, by criticism, by too many failure experiences, by too much harshness, and grows up with a sense of inferiority. Those who are feeling handicapped and inferior have trouble finding the wherewithal to find an immortality project and do what they need to do to keep generativity flowing. Now, our culture is also set up in a way that makes trouble. Uh, I'm of two minds about this. Uh, we don't need this anymore. Let me take this out of here. On the one hand, our culture has always esteemed trying to set up an expectation that we can retire one day. And for many people, it has been the pattern post 1950 to be able to retire in one's 60s or in one's early 70s and not have to work anymore. And we thought that that's a good thing. But what we're doing is asking people to give up whatever it's doing that defines them and gives them a sense of purpose and gives them a sense of generativity. So uh, retirement can be quite challenging, and it can be a major stressor in somebody's life, not necessarily a wonderful outcome for a life well lived. And for too many people, uh, retirement should not be an option. People would be better off if they never retired, or if they could find a new career for themselves when they retired from their previous career. I'm not a big fan of retirement. And as the capitalistic culture has become more complex and more burdensome, I think fewer and fewer people are able to retire. And that's not entirely a bad thing. That may be very sustaining in some ways, even if people grumble about it. They all have wonderful daydreams about how great it would be to go play golf every day or to go sail in the Virgin Islands. And they do it for a while and they get bored stiff and life feels meaningless to them and feels empty. So I certainly, as a therapist, spent a good deal of time with some people who've retired, trying to help them to renew themselves and find something else to do with their life other than the daydream of buying the RV and going driving around the country. That doesn't really seem to do much for many people over a long period of time. Let me then turn to what the signs are of difficulty in this era. If we are working in the consulting room and somebody comes in who's chronologically at risk. Screen sharing, here I go again. Let me pull up this, and it should be on the screen. Let me close this or pull it out of the way. Yes, it is there. I have really mastered this for the last and most important time. And I need to go to stage 4 prime on the next page. 3, 4, 1 prime, 2 prime, 3 prime, 4 prime. Here are some of the signs that one is getting lost in stagnation during this stage. You will hear complaints about frequent death terrors, actual nightmares about dying, um, just driving somewhere quietly and suddenly having a panic that death is coming, being very preoccupied with the oncoming ravages of aging, feeling the beginnings of a loss of vitality, being very focused on it. For women, particularly since poor women live in a youth culture in this country, them being haunted by images that they're losing their youthful beauty. Lines are coming, hair thinning is coming, varicose veins are coming, all kinds of things are coming, and they're frightened they're going to be abandoned. They're frightened they're going to be thrown on the scrap heap of destiny. They start spending thousands and thousands of dollars on plastic surgery to try and push back against this. A loss of sexual desire and a sense of sexual desirability. We start getting shy and not wanting to enter the sexual cauldron and the sexual encounter because we're going to be found old and decrepit and unappealing and not worthy and not desirable anymore. A loss of productive capacity, being at loose ends. Maybe the old career is just stagnant, but the old career is not doing anything. Nobody's producing anything anymore that has any meaning, or retirement has happened, or they've been fired from a position and they're not productive in any way. And they're suffering because they're not doing anything that they feel is worthwhile and makes any reasonable use of their talents. And finally, an oncoming sense that perhaps they haven't mattered at all, that nothing they've done with their life has had any real meaning, and or they're going to wind up all alone. They're going to be on the pile of decrepitude. Nobody's going to want to be with them because life is for young people. The principle of transition that's necessary to help them through the stage and to help them to find their purpose again is to help them identify and create a new sustaining immortality project or projects for the self. It can begin with encouraging the client to do that which has always been held in abeyance. If there have been a bunch of daydreams about possible things they could have done, but they never attempted them, they could start there. They can start attempting to do the very things they never wanted to do. They've always wanted to be a poet. All right, start writing some poetry. They've always wanted to learn to paint. Take painting lessons. They've always wanted to see what it would be like to learn coding and to become proficient with coding. Study coding. Go do it. It's like encouraging them to have a second adolescence, to take the daydreams about possibilities and to Transform the daydreams into activities where they're actually attempting to do what they said they were going to do. Take up mentor relationships. Use the wisdom they've gained and actively start passing it on to the next generation. Uh, right. Do anything creative. Create something. Create anything. Finally, I encourage people to engage in eulogy reviews. They're afraid of dying without having mattered. Ask them to write possible eulogies. What would they like to be remembered for? If they have an insufficiency of the things that they would like being remembered for, what are they going to do between now and when they actually die? Because they're not dead yet. And how could they wind up with a eulogy they would feel proud of? It's still not too late. Unless they have a life threatening illness already, it's likely they're going to live at least another decade, 2 or 3 from the point where this starts before they're going to expire. And that is time to rewrite the eulogy that they feel like they're stuck with at the present time. So those are my comments about the stage, what the stage consists of, and what some of the struggles are about. So I think I will move on beyond that to why don't we just go on to the next stage because it's here. I wonder if I can get it back again. Well, it's stage five prime. And I think I will take this away for the time being because I want to tell a story about a client who was drowning in stage five prime, ego integrity versus despair. That is the last act of one's life. We know that death is really moving closer and closer. We may have a terminal illness already. We can already feel various kinds of decline, and we know there can't be that much longer, even if we don't feel particularly terrible yet. And what starts happening at this point is the kind of eulogy review I encouraged earlier really starts with a vengeance now. What is the summing up of my life? How do I view what I've managed to do? What's my report card that I would give to myself? So I now remember there's not only a client I want to talk about, I want to talk about Tolstoy's novella, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. That's what this is about. Somebody who is facing death. In Ilyich's life, he has done many things. Tolstoy describes him as being on his deathbed, and what he's going to archive in this novella are all of Ilyich's ruminations. The priest has been there to bestow the final rites. Ilyich knows it's probably only a matter of hours before the candle of his life gutters out and he is no longer here. And he starts a life review. Well, there's much I can be proud of, he's saying to himself. I inherited my father's estate. It was so many square hectares in dimension when I inherited it. It's now 3 times as big as when he left it to me. I managed to expand his estates, acquire the properties on various sides of it, put in more crops, more orchards. I have more serfs working for me now than he ever had before. I now have 50 serfs that I own that are tending all the gardens and all the farm productions. And I have made myself very, very wealthy, far wealthier than he was when I inherited his means and his estate. I've been married to the same woman for 40 years, and I'm still married to her. We didn't throw each other away. We didn't get so tired of each other we couldn't go on with our relationship. Our relationships endures. It's the bedrock of my life. And it's now we've celebrated our 40th anniversary. We have 2 children. The children are grown up, and we've managed to take very good care of them. They've had wonderful educations. They help out around the estate, and they help me to be productive. I have 4 grandchildren, and they're all adorable. And I have done everything I've been expected to do. And then he reaches the end of his congratulating himself about all these things. And He's horrified, and he says, but maybe all of that is empty, he says to himself. You know, I never wanted to do any of this. My life has been tedious, it's been joyless. Uh, I have managed my father's estates that I inherited. I was his only child. He told me I had to take over when he died, that I was going to be in his place, and that was my destiny. I wanted to go to the conservatory in Moscow. I was good playing the cello, and I wanted to become a cellist. I wanted that to be my destiny. And we fought bitter fights that I was going to leave, and he would threaten to disinherit me, and he would leave this estate to my mother and tell her to hire a manager, and he wasn't going to give me a penny if I went off to Moscow, and he wasn't going to support me or take care of me in Moscow. I was going to have to figure out how to study the cello on my own. And after months and months and months of acrimony, I sold out and I agreed to give up my dream and to stay here and to learn from him the tricks of managing this estate, to devote my future time and energy to that. And I think that may have been a mistake. I often daydream where the other path would have led me. And God damn it, I'll never know now where the other path would have left me. But it certainly felt like the path that was heartfelt. And I still feel today like I sold out. And my wife, I've been with her for 40 years. We have nothing to say to each other. She is the most boring woman I have ever met. I tell her pass the salt at the dinner table, and I ask her what she's having the servants make for breakfast in the morning, and that's about the only conversation we have about anything. She goes off to her quarters in the evening, and I go off to mine. We stopped being sexual with each other 20 years ago, and I haven't been sexual with anybody. I'm sexual with myself, and I can barely do that anymore, and it's very unsatisfying. And I think I sold out and married the wrong woman. And my children, we wreck them. They are spoiled brats. They preen around like they're self important and like they're wonderful. They don't know how to do a fucking thing. They have no talent at anything. All they have talent at is spending money, and they've ruined my grandchildren. My grandchildren are as spoiled as they are, and they're very annoying and very demanding to be around. I don't enjoy any family gathering. I usually get drunk or I go off and read something in another room while the family is doing whatever miserable thing it's doing, interacting with each other. And then at that moment, Ilyich dies. And all the reviewers took this to task. This is the most dark and despairing piece of literature they've ever read. What is Tolstoy trying to tell us about this? About how all our lives are false and meaningless and worthless, and all of us should just go and commit suicide? What is this? And Tolstoy wrote a rebuttal to the negative reviews he was getting. No, Ilyich is the one of the most heroic people I could ever imagine. He is what I'm trying to say is it's never too late. We can throw away the falseness of life at any point as long as we have breath in us. We can see the truth. We can begin to embrace the truth. We can begin to try to start making changes. We can begin to become real. It is not too late, even in the last hours of death. So I'm pleading with those of you who are not close to death now, don't wait as long as Ilyich did to live a life that's real. So I found his comment. I found the novella and his comments quite inspiring, because that's what we psychologists are in the business of doing, to try and take away cant and clatter and falseness of lifestyles, and to help people to see what's real and what's important to them, and to find the courage to try to implement as much of it as they can before they die. With that being said, I will tell about a client. I got a call one day, and as I listened to the message on we had answering machines back then. I saw her many years ago when we still had answering machines and not voicemail. So I pushed the start button on the answering machine. I could tell this was a woman who was speaking with a thick Middle Eastern accent of some kind. And she asked me if I was taking new people, and she had never talked to a psychologist before. but she was getting on in years, and she was feeling very, very depressed, and she thinks she needed to talk to a psychologist. And did I have time to see her? And I got back in touch with her, and I asked her who referred me. And back then we had yellow pages. So she had looked through the yellow pages. She had picked me. Why had she picked me? Because my name was Kovac. And obviously I was Hungarian, and she was a Hungarian immigrant and come from Hungary. And she thought maybe I could understand her story because I was a fellow Hungarian. And was it true that I was born in Hungary? No, I said, no, I wasn't born in Hungary, but my father was born in Hungary, and he was the generation that came to this country. But I know something about life in Hungary. I could understand if you wanted to come and talk to me. And she said, well, when could you see me? She said, I don't live too far away. I live in Santa Monica, and you're in here in Santa Monica somewhere. I could take the bus to see you. I'm old and I don't drive anymore. And could I take the bus to see you? Yes, you could take the bus. How about the middle of the day? Sometimes I'll keep you out of traffic when the buses are not too crowded. Yeah, that was fine. So we made an appointment, and she walked in, and she sounded like Ilyich. She sat down and she said, everything in my life is terrible and it's too late. I can't fix anything anymore. That was her opening comment. And she started weeping. And she just cried and she cried and she cried. And I just made a decision that she was crying and I was not going to interfere or interrupt. I passed her a Kleenex box and she cried. And I just wait and again, and then maybe I would say something to her. And I waited. It took her about 8 minutes, I think, of constant crying before she was finished crying. And I said, I'm not going to argue with you. You started with the most profoundly sad thing I've heard in so many days. Maybe you'll take the prize for the whole week. But you said everything in your life is terrible and there's nothing you could do about it anymore. I don't want to dispute what you're saying. It may be true that everything in your life is terrible and you can't do anything about it anymore. But I'd like you to start picking the things in your life that are broken, terrible, that you can't do anything about, and let me hear what's on the list. And she said, I don't know if I could tell you all of it in one session. And I said, well, you don't have to tell me all in one session. You could begin. What is the first and most terrible thing in your life that is happening to you? And she said, I have a child. I am 82 now, and he is 69. He's getting on in years, and he is profoundly retarded. She said, we used the word retarded back then. He has an IQ of about 45. And I'm his connection with life. I have him in one of the rooms of our apartment, and I fix his meals for him, and I read to him, and I take him for walks. But my husband is blind, and he doesn't have the energy to do much with him anymore. I'm going to die, and maybe die before my husband because I'm a cancer survivor. And how is he going to take care of our son? I think my son is going to wind up in some kind of institution, and my husband is going to wind up in some institution, and I won't be able to spare them from having to do that anymore. And she started crying again for a while. And I said, yes, that's very painful. I can understand that. And thank you for your devotion. For all these years, you've watched over those two people. And yes, it's possible. Certainly, you might die first, and that is going to be a tragedy. And they are going to be in serious trouble if you're not here to buffer them in the ways that you do. And I said, what else? Well, she said, I had another child, but that child isn't with me anymore. And I said, oh, where is she? Is it male, female? Oh, she left our lives. She just walked out on you? Not exactly. She was really the apple of my eye. She was the most smart. She was the most brilliant. She did so well in school. And she wound up with a straight A average in Santa Monica High School. And then she got a scholarship to UCLA, and she was getting straight A's at UCLA. She wanted to be a school teacher, I think, and she was studying education. And in the third year of being at UCLA, a guy was on the path approaching students. He was a public relations person for the Sun Myung Moon cult, and he was there preaching the beliefs of the cult and calling on students passing by to listen and telling them if they wanted to have lives that were radiant and much better than the ones they were preparing for, they would listen to his message. And there was going to be a meeting on the weekend that they could go to and hear a more thorough presentation of why it was important for them to hear the message that he was starting to give them. And she had listened, that it sounded interesting, and she had gone off that weekend to the meeting, and she got really excited that she was hearing new things and new perspectives on the meaning of life that she had never heard before. We're Jewish by calling, but she had never been terribly interested in Judaism or found it very spiritually sustaining. But the message of the leaders that she was listening to resonated with her. And more, she started going to more and more meetings. And one day she came home and said, she wanted us to come away with her. She was going to move to upstate New York, where the headquarters of the movement was. They were going to give her a job, and they said that her family was welcome. And this was the solution to big problems they were having. There would be housing for me and for my son and for my husband. We could come, and the leadership of the movement would take care of us. They would provide us housing and feed us, and we wouldn't have to worry about loneliness or government intervention or government charity anymore. Everything would be taken care of. And I told her I could not turn my back on my Jewish heritage. I didn't believe in this. It's a con game of some kind. It's awful. She's going to be lost, and she needs to not go there, and she needs to resist the temptation. We had better fights with each other about what I saw was a great mistake she was making, but she refused to listen to me, and she said she was going, and she would arrange for us, and she would have us come visit her if she could, and we would see that she was right and we were wrong. And she went off. And after a while, I just got a phone call from her saying she was saying goodbye. Unless I was agreeing to come and move immediately there, they had convinced her that I was my life here and what I was urging on her was contaminating her, and it was poisoning her life, and that she had to divest herself of her connection with her brother, her father, and me. Otherwise, she could never find the final perfect fulfillment that the path of the culture was providing for her, and she was moving along the path very effectively and becoming increasingly enlightened. As a matter of fact, she met a man there, and they were thinking of getting together, and they were going to sustain each other and keep each other company on the path to full enlightenment. And I refused. I said, if I'm going to lose you, I will mourn, I will grieve, but you are wrong. And one day you will discover that you were wrong, and you'll come back to my side. And she started crying again. And she said, that was 7 years ago, and there's been nothing but silence. And I miss her terribly. And I know that she's being corrupted, and some awful fate befalls her if she doesn't come to her senses and find her way out of that terrible cult. And it took us almost all up to the end of the session to go through that. And she said, I'm only beginning to tell you what's horrible. And I said, well, come back. I don't charge for an initial visit. I'll just consider that we haven't finished our initial visit. You have much more to tell me if I'm to understand you. And why don't you come soon? I don't have anybody tomorrow, 3 o'clock. So come back tomorrow, 3 o'clock, and we'll just take up where we left off. And she said, well, there's something else I have to tell you. I don't know how much I can pay you. I said, well, let's talk about that now if that's a problem for you. And she said, I said, what are you living on? Well, my husband, because he's blind, has a small disability pension. And I used to work for the city of Los Angeles. I have my retirement money that I get. I have a retirement pension. So I asked her what the sum total of that was, monthly income that each of them got. And I asked her about what her expenses were, including getting some relief and some special services for her son and some relief for herself, getting some babysitting services for her son when her husband was too tired or they wanted to go out and have dinner together out in the community and didn't feel safe leaving him alone. I ran the numbers and I said, no, you can't afford to pay me very much. And I said, look, I'm supposed to do some pro bono work. Why don't I just not charge you anything? That would be okay with me. I'll see you as much as you need to come and I won't charge you anything. She said, no, that's unacceptable. I'm a very proud person. She said, do you have a fireplace at home? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, there are many pine trees around my apartment building where I live, and they drop lots of pine cones. I said, I could bring you a bag of pine cones every week and you can throw them into the fire that you start. That's very good for getting fires started. And they crackle and they burn nicely. Maybe that would give you some pleasure. And do you like Hungarian cooking? And I said, yes. And she says, once in a while I make stuffed cabbage or something else. Could I just bring you a mason jar full of food? I'll make extra food for some meal and you can eat the dinner. I'll make enough for you and your wife. And you can have some Hungarian dinner, some goulash I'll make, something. She said, would you like that? Yeah, I said, yeah, you could do that occasionally. That would be very nice. I would thank you for that. And she said, I would feel better if I did some things for you. And you weren't the only one doing things for me. So I think I'm going to cry. So I thanked her for her kindness and decency. And then she said, there's something else that hurts even more. I said, what's that? She said, I didn't even want to talk about it. She said there was another child. And I said, oh, a third child? She said, yes, he was actually the oldest. And, oh no, I'm sorry. It was the second child. Her brother, her younger brother was the other child because he was still a child. She had talked as if she had had only one child, a daughter, but there was a second child, a male who had actually been born before the daughter. And he was also exceptionally bright, capable, and creative. He was a whiz in kindergarten, but he died when he was 6 years old in first grade. He died of leukemia. And she told me the story. He had gotten leukemia and she was terrified and heartsick, and she kept hoping he would live. And they tried every known chemo that they had available back then. And they said they weren't sure that he could make it. And sure enough, eventually they said there was nothing further they could do for him. And the last story she told me was of his death. They sent him home to be at home. And one of the things he loved most was Halloween. He loved going trick or treating. He was always interested in what costume he was going to wear. He loved going to people's houses and getting the candy. And what he wanted to do, he knew he was very sick. He wanted to be sure that he could enjoy Halloween and that he wouldn't be too sick to have Halloween. He was already bedridden in a hospital bed in the living room of their apartment, waiting for death to come. But she promised him she would roll the hospital bed close to the door to the apartment, and when the trick-or-treaters knocked at the door, she would have the candy ready for him, and he could struggle up into a sitting position. She would prop the bed up and he could pass out the treats to the people who were coming and see all the costumes of the people who were coming for the trick or treats. So that's what she did. And he was happy again for a period of time. He ignored his pain and he ignored his weakness, and he was fully alive and fully present and enjoying the wonders of Halloween. And he went to sleep that night, died in the night. He had lived as long as he could stay alive until that event took place, and then he quietly died. And she said, do you want to see what he looked like? I said, yeah. And she pulled a picture of him out. She had been carrying a picture of him at 6 years old for decades and decades, and was the picture was still there, and she still was grieving and crying. I started grieving and crying when she pulled the picture of her son out, and she said, the wound never goes away. I can never forget. I said, that's pretty terrible too. How can I bring my son back? I can't. How can I get my brother not to be damaged? I can't. How can I bring my daughter back into my life? I can't. How can I earn a better living? Because I used to be the one who earned the better living and we lived better then. No, I can't. I'm too old. I can't do anything anymore except wait around to die. So what the hell was I going to do with her? Oh, and she added Tolstoy's outcry. I don't think anything in my life mattered. What was the purpose of my life anyhow? It's all ruined. It's all wrecked. It all went awry. Who cares if I lived? Who's even going to remember that I was here? I never accomplished anything. Nothing. So I said, well, that's different. I was thinking somehow of panning for gold. Maybe that's what I'd like to do. You're telling me about this terrible river, and the river's deposited you where you sit on the river's bank now, and the whole river trip has been meaningless, and there's no point to it at all. I said, let's take a pan. Why don't we go walking along the bank of the river and in the river partly, go upstream a little bit, downstream a little bit. Let's pan for gold. Maybe there's gold in that river you haven't even noticed because you've never gone panning for the gold. But let me take you panning. Maybe we can find some gold nuggets. Maybe the stream is not just an empty stream with no value in it. So I said, go back to the beginnings of your life. What was it like when you were small? And she said, it was okay in the beginning. Uh, my father, he was a veterinarian who shoed horses. He didn't heal horses, but he put horseshoes on horses, and he worked for a landed gentleman who had many horses in the stable. And we were given a place to live in on the estate, and we were given food to eat, and I didn't have to worry. And I was allowed to go to school in the neighboring village school, and I liked being a student. But suddenly, when I was 6 or 7 years old, I don't remember when, uh, things started to get bad. Pogroms started in Hungary, and Jews started to be persecuted and killed. And my father got frightened, and even of the owner of the estate didn't know if he could keep us around. He was afraid he would fall into political disfavor if he continued to give employment to Jews. And we were very scared for our future. And our father said to us, I think we have to get out of this country. And he had managed to save some money, and he had managed to give my mother some jewelry, and he tried to figure out if he sold the jewelry and took the money, was there enough money to get us boat passage to the United States? And he decided, yes, if we went into steerage, he could probably manage to get us to the United States. And he told us to pack up, and in the middle of the night we fled, and we just found our way to the nearest port. We got all the way to Bremerhaven in Germany. We were hitching rides and taking public transportation when we could. And we worked our way there, not spending too much money. And he bought boat passage, and we got on a steamer out of Bremerhaven and headed for Ellis Island and New York. And while we were about 3 days voyage still out of New York, my father suddenly had a brain hemorrhage and he died at sea. And he was buried at sea. And my mother was in a panic. My brother was still, it was obvious my brother was a very troubled person who was not competent. And she didn't know how we were going to survive or what would happen to us after we got off the boat in New York. They buried my father at sea. And we got off the boat in Ellis Island. And fortunately, there were Jewish charity people waiting at the docks. This was, let me see, was in the late 1920s, she was telling me about. Uh, and Jewish charities took us in. They found us housing. They fed us for a while, and they finally found my mother a job in running a sewing machine in a sweatshop. She was in the garment industry, and I had to stay home and took care of my brother. And they provided some temporary daycare for him. After a while, I was able to go back to school, but the depression continued and it was very serious and it was hard for us to make ends meet. We went hungry some of the time. And I was 9 years old by then and I had learned English. My mother didn't have much facility for language at all. So she said, I'm sorry, you're going to have to leave school and you're going to have to go back to work you're going to have to work too. And we'll find somebody to come in and look after brother, but we need you to earn money. And I went to work running a sewing machine at age 9 beside my mother and making whatever money we could. And I stopped school. And one of the things that broke my heart is I loved reading. I loved English literature. I would spend whatever free time I had when I wasn't exhausted reading Shakespeare, reading Melville, reading everything I could lay my hands on. I tried to educate myself about the history of America. I studied on my own. I found what textbooks were being used in the school, and I tried to give myself an education without a teacher. And I discovered I was very smart. And I said, all right, that's one of the nuggets of gold. You are very intelligent. Did you ever manage to get back to school? And she said, I didn't get back to school, but I kept studying and working and studying, and I managed to get a GED degree from high school. I passed the examination. I got the equivalent of a high school diploma without actually having gone to any formal schooling. So I can say I'm a high school graduate now, and I feel proud of being a high school graduate. And I said, I'm glad. That's another nugget of gold that you deserve. I said, but you managed to get married. How the hell did that happen? Uh, and she said, well, uh, I, uh, I did my mother's thing. I got Jewish charity to send some babysitting for my brother so I could get some relief when I wasn't working. And I was taking an extension course at USC on campus. I would go to USC and take a Saturday morning course. I forgot what I was studying, but I was still trying to educate myself. So now I was taking college level courses in extension, and USC was close to where we lived. And so I went to USC and paid the tuition to go there. And while I was on a break from class, I was sitting on the campus and a man came walking by and he noticed me and came and sat down beside me. And we started talking. And he was a medical student. And he said, are you Jewish? And I said, yes. He said, good. I'm Jewish too. He said, what are you doing here? And I said, I work as a waitress in a delicatessen, but I'm here learning because one can never learn too much. And I don't have a formal education, but I'm studying whatever it is I'm studying. He said, well, I find that admirable. Could I spend some time with you? Do you have any man in your life? And she said, no. And she told him about the brother, and he said, well, that'll be interesting. I'm studying all kinds of human conditions, so let me take a look at your brother too. I'd be happy to come over and meet with you and your brother. Would you cook a home cooked meal from me? Because my family's in New York City and I haven't had a home cooked meal in a long time. She said, sure, I'll cook a dinner for you and you come over. So they started courting, and he was very nice to her brother. And he told her that he liked her a lot. And she said, I had a secret all these years. I said, what's the secret? She said, I never found him very appealing. He's actually quite a boring person, she said. But he was very decent and very kind, and he was interested in me. And at some point, and it turned out he came from a very wealthy family. So I was being very practical. If I married him, I could not have to worry. Maybe I could go to college if I married him. Maybe my brother would have a permanent kind of nanny who was going to help take care of him. It seemed, in my generation, many people got married for practical reasons, and he was not a child abuser. I could imagine having sex with him. That wasn't too miserable or too awful for me to go through. So this is one of the secrets I've never told him. He's a decent man, and I am fond of him, and I respect him, but that's not why I married him. So he took my brother and me to a visit to meet his family in New York, and they lived in great opulence. They had a mansion just outside of Manhattan, on the Hudson, and they were very gracious to me, and they showed us around, and they gave us a lovely trip to New York. And then when we were about to leave, his father took us aside and said, I need to say something. He said to his son, it seems like you're getting serious about this woman. And he said to her, I don't want you to take any offense, but you are beneath him. He needs somebody from his own class. He needs to come from a Jewish aristocratic, he needs a wife from an aristocratic Jewish family. And he needs a wife that he can be proud to have children with. And you're a wife in need. You're a decent person and you have reasonable values, but you don't bring much to the table other than he has to take care of you in certain ways. And I want him to come from a distinguished family that will help grow his net worth on top of everything else and provide for a distinguished career, maybe found a scholarship at USC in his name, help him get started in practice, do whatever's necessary, pay for his residency, but you're not it. I'm very sorry. You're going to have to say goodbye to him. And much to my surprise, he said to his father, no, this is the woman I am going to be with. And the father then said, if she's the woman you're going to be with, I'm withdrawing all support to you from you. You're going to have to make your way through the rest of medical school on your own, and you're going to have to figure out how to take care of a wife and children without family help. And the son said, I hate you for this, but so be it. Goodbye. And he took us to the train station and we returned to California. And he managed to do it. He found part-time gigs to take on the weekends. He was a physician's assistant because of his medical training sometimes before he got fully licensed. And he fought his way through medical school. Between my salary and his salary, we managed to survive somehow. And the breach with his family was never healed. They never have talked to us ever since. They sat Shiva for us, and we're dead as far as they're concerned. I have no relationship with my in-laws still. And I said the story of his willingness to embrace you and make your life more comfortable and more possible than you could have by yourself is another nugget of gold. That's a wonderful story and a tribute to the worthwhileness of the world. But tell me this as we keep panning for gold. You said you have some kind of pension from the city of Los Angeles. You managed to stop waiting tables. What the hell did you do? And she said, I got bored waiting tables and I was in a restaurant. It was not an opulent restaurant. The tips were not that great because the meals were not that expensive. I could never get hired in some really fancy restaurant where they would have given me many, many dollars after a meal. I know some waiters make a very nice living waiting tables, not me. So I kept searching the civil service announcements and uh, the the city of Los Angeles had an opening for somebody to do clerical work, and all that was required was a high school diploma. So I went with my equivalency certificate, and they allowed me to sit for the exam for the position. And I scored off the charts on the exam. I said, wait a minute, stop right there. That you're telling me about another nugget of gold. That's really quite beautiful. You ace the civil service exam. Yes, and then I had to be hired, and this position was actually working in the mayor's office. So the mayor himself, Mayor Bradley back then, interviewed me, and he liked me, and he said, "You seem like a very thoughtful, very careful, and very meticulous person. I need you to keep my appointment book. I need you to make my appointments. I need you to keep my schedule and advise me of where I need to go next. And I need you to start helping me decide who I should spend time with and who I can fend off. As you get smarter, if somebody asks for an appointment with me, I want you to be able to interview them and try and help me decide whether it was worth any of my time actually to spend time with them or whether they should see somebody else on my staff. So I need you to be a kind of personal assistant to mine." She said, "That sounds wonderful." And for all the years that Mayor Bradley was elected and reelected, she was, in effect, his personal assistant. And he trusted her with more and more responsibility. And he tried to give her successively better titles that were consistent. She moved up to being his administrative assistant, and then she wound up being his chief of staff. That was the title that she carried before she retired. And she was a very significant player in the life of the city. And he would not make any decision without closing his door, asking her to come in and telling her what his dilemma was, and running it by her and getting her opinion before she decided. And I said, "My God." And she looked at me and she said, "Maybe am really something after all." And she was smiling and shaking her head in approval of herself finally. She had come up out of the doldrums of self loathing that her life had been meaningless and without any purpose and without any accomplishments that she could take home. So I was now into the better parts of 4 visits with her, mining for gold and lifting her spirits. She was leaving my office increasingly each time, looking more peaceful and not as full of despair as she had been. And then in the fifth time, this is a mystical story. A miracle happened. She came in all excited and she said, "You'll never guess what happened." And she said, "You're right. I'm not a mind reader. I'm not a good guesser about what has happened. You're going to have to tell me what has happened." She said, "Last night I got a telephone call from my daughter." And I said, "What?" She said, "My daughter called me." And I said, "What did your daughter want to say?" She started off, she said, "I need to apologize for it to you. You are right. We have been trapped in a cult. Our lives became hideous." And she said, "We have escaped." And it was like a jailbreak. She said, "I did get married. The man I married was the director of the accounting operations for the cult. He knew where all the money was, and he was responsible for paying all the bill and stashing away the fundraising money. He knew all the secrets of the cult. He had great power. And he knew that we could probably be killed because he knew the inside details of all the corruption and where money was being put away for personal pleasures of the Reverend and the secret life the Reverend had of great indulgence and sybaritic orgies. And he knew that he could not leave without the Reverend trying to get him killed. So we had to work out a way we were going to leave in the middle of the night. And he managed to get a secret account, and he managed to get a secret phone number and a secret line coming into the place. And he put out he got a PO box address and managed to get off campus to get into the PO box when he needed to. He put out job applications, and he's been hired by the city of Baltimore. We're going to Baltimore, Maryland, and uh, we fled a week ago. We're already in Baltimore. We're looking for apartments and staying in a hotel. And I want to tell you, you're now a grandmother. We have a child, and all we want is to make amends to you for the pain that I've caused you. We want you to bring my brother, my uncle rather, and come move here, move to Baltimore. We'd like to. We're very wealthy. We managed to get our hands on some of the ill-gotten gains, so we have plenty of money to take care of us and you, and we will get you a nice apartment within walking distance of where we are, maybe even in the same building, and you can stay vital and on your own as long as you want to, and we'll find skilled nursing facilities to you if you get infirm. All we want is to have as much of our family back, and we need to do the same thing with his family as happened first. And she was just crying with such joy. She said, I can't even believe what we're saying. Of course, there's nothing that's holding us here. We're going to leave, and we're going to come to Baltimore as fast as we can. And she said, we'll send you the airplane tickets right away. Please make the reservations, close up your apartment, bail on the lease if you have a lease, and we'll make up the loss to you. There's no problem. Just get here. Get here as fast as you can. So she told me, this is the last time I'm going to be meeting with you. Thank you for all the help you've given me. And I said, thank you for the kreplach, and thank you for the pine cones. and thank you for your life story. Your life story is precious. I'm going to tell your life story over and over and over again. Your life story has not been without meaning. Your life story is not without interest. Your life story is your eulogy, and it's a beautiful one. I wish you many years. I hope you can live on to take advantage of all the goodness that's coming into your life right now. And I hope when it is time for you to leave, you'll be able to leave with a smile on your face. This goddamn story makes me cry. Well, I saw her a couple more times. She was living in Baltimore, and I was going to American Psychological Association meetings in Washington. And Baltimore is really only a 40-minute drive from DC. And there's public transportation between the two cities. So sometimes when I would go to DC, I would say, I have nobody to have dinner with tomorrow night. Would you and your husband come? And oh, that's another thing. I forgot. One of the sessions I did couples therapy with that I'll tell you about. Can you and your husband come and have dinner with me? I'll be glad to take you out to dinner, and you can catch me up on gossip. So I saw them twice more before she finally died. I got a heartbroken telephone message from him that she had died, and her funeral was going to be. And I sent a eulogy to be read for her at her funeral. I couldn't make it to her funeral, unfortunately, but I sent a eulogy about what a special woman she had been. Uh, Her story about her husband emboldened me to see if I did couples therapy, I could do something to enliven the quality of life between the two of them. She was disappointed with him. She had never told him how she had never loved him anyhow, but she was disappointed because he spent all his time listening to news on the radio, and sometimes they would go to a movie, but because he could hear the movie even if he couldn't see it, but she would have to mutter to him what was going on the screen. But there was not much between them. There was certainly no comfort or affection. So I got him to agree to tell her occasionally why he had loved her and was happy he was married to her, because he never gave her any verbal acknowledgement. And once in a while, could he give him a hug? And when they went to the movies, it was to a local movie, or when they went out to dinner to a cafeteria nearby, it was local and they would walk. Would he hold her hand while they walked? And he agreed to make those changes. And he started to become a little bit more expressive about her preciousness in his life. And he started to touch her more. And human touch is always a good thing. And she was thriving on that too. It was improving between the two of them as well before they left. All right, it is now 5 o'clock local time. I think I will stop crying and come up out of this story and give you guys a chance to comment on anything. And I'll take up here with what I know about stage 5 prime next time, and also the family life cycle stage that has to do with end of life issues.
Okay. Arthur, what a wonderful story. And what a valuable lesson for all of us therapists, because in some ways what you were doing and what you provided for her was as you had talked about, an immortality project was with you.
Yes,
It wasn't something that she could do or did do or could provide, but in some ways that it's a story, her immortality exists with you as you tell the story.
absolutely. I
Yeah,
am now the repository of her life story.
yeah. And now we are.
Yes,
Now everybody is.
she deserves it. She was a very brave and very resilient woman. Overcoming everything. And boy, the world really threw a lot of pain at her.
And if you look back and you kind of see her life, she really did have a wonderful life. There were certainly some problems and some issues and some conflicts, but in some ways that she she weathered through so many different things.
Yes,
Yeah.
without being destroyed.
Hmm.
Hmm.
She was a brave woman.
Yes, she was.
Yeah, it reminds me of that quote, don't ask for an easier life, ask for to be a stronger person, in essence.
I had forgotten that one. That one's quite beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. And she definitely, maybe without realizing it, rose to each equation, rose to each situation.
She did.
Yeah.
What is the path forward? How do I surmount this? How do I get through it, over it, under it, around it, heal from it? My
Hmm.
God, I'm sure both of you have clients in your practices who seem done in, have given up, are just sort of existing in misery with far less stress and trauma than she lived through.
Yeah. And then how'd you manage to get the daughter to call her? That was really you need to learn how to use that technique more, because that was really,
That's part of my mystical prowess.
it seems so.
A miracle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
miracles do happen sometimes. Hmm. But I like that technique I invented. I use it now frequently with elderly people, searching for the nuggets of goodness in their lives that they have forgotten to pay any attention to.
And what you provided her with was kind of like a feeling or an existence in the end of her life, which was peaceful.
Mhm. Other than having to master whatever her terminal illness was, her life now was mainly a life of sweetness and goodness.
Mhm.
That's something I say to my wife because uh, maybe it beckons me on that I need to get it right before I die, as if it's possible to achieve something like I imagine she achieved. Everything at last seems it's okay and right. There's no source of
Not possible.
not possible.
You might get pretty close though.
There's no terrible pain other than maybe the pain of having to die, but human relations are in reasonable shape. Survival's in reasonable shape. There's enough going on that's interesting and worth getting up to pay attention to every day. I don't have a huge, extensive, I don't need to be the richest man in the world, or I don't need to get elected to some high office in order for everything to be right. It's a life really of quite quiet simplicity, getting it right.
You provided her with great kindness and understanding.
For some reason, it was easy with her. With many clients, I find it hard to summon that up and deliver that. I struggle with annoyance or disappointment or other kinds of feeling states. She was easy to care about for some reason. Oh, I forgot to mention she was very overweight. One of her way of surviving was to do comfort eating. That was the only sweetness and goodness she had in her life. She
She
would
must have
comfort
been a
herself
good
with,
cook.
yeah, well, she would comfort herself with sweet desserts she would make. She made strudel. Yes, that's quite Hungarian to make strudel. Oh, she was diabetic as a result of eating too much. She was afraid her diabetes was going to incapacitate her or kill her. It may have been what finally killed her. Although she did say to me on the occasion of those dinners, she smiled and she said, since my daughter came back, I'm starting to lose weight. She was getting more and better human nourishment now. She didn't have to settle for calories and sugar to provide the nourishment. Hmm. All right, I think I'm finished now. I will be back in 2 weeks. We're going to be taking off for a week. See you in a couple.
All
Okay,
right. See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
bye.